I've been, I guess, watching a lot more TV than I have ever in the past decade. Not anything current, of course, because that would be too normal, but lots of, I wonder if you have seen this, a lot of Nigel Neal stuff. Specifically, recently I watched his anthology show, Beasts. Have you ever seen that?
You know, I haven't, but I have heard about it. It's apparently the goods are great. The less than goods are reviewable. Yeah. It
has some standouts that I might possibly want to talk about on this show in the future, but also I've been watching a lot of the movies that he scripted, like the Stone Tape, some of the Quatermass movies that I hadn't seen before. I just love
fantastic. The Stone Tape in particular is fantastic. Very, very atmospheric. They used to play it a lot around kind of November, December over here, which is the perfect kind of atmosphere setting, cold, a little bit foggy, sort of dark nights, and, you'd sort of get in front of the TV and that would be on. And, it's definitely got a very strong vibe. And the thing as well to bear in mind with Nigel Neal, and it's quite a nice sort of Easter egg if you are into watching particularly old British television, is he used to do a lot of moonlighting in kind of pitching and script editing. In particular, he did quite a bit of work around Doctor Who. So, there are at least a handful of classic Doctor Who episodes from the 70s where if you do a bit of digging and find out who was script editing it or who ghost wrote it, it was Nigel Neal.
Yeah.
He was very good friends with the Doctor Who production team, so they'd sort of regularly get together and just sort of throw ideas around, which was quite good. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head which ones they were. I think my gut is telling me there was one called The Demons or The Daemons that was very Wicker Man-y that he had some involvement in, and there was one called Inferno in the early 70s as well that was very kind of his style. Mm-hmm. It deals with sort of parallel universes, and basically the Doctor lands in an alternate reality where a global disaster is about to happen due to a oil drilling exposition, and he spends half the story trying to warn the parallel universe that this is going to destroy the Earth, and he fails, and then gets sent back to his original universe where they're just about to start, and he gets another chance, and he sort of is able to learn from what happened in the parallel universe because it's running similar sort of themes. He's able to sort of steer time a little bit away from it, which is quite interesting. He was a very clever man. He had a lot of very interesting ideas. And he almost certainly was a flavour enhancer for British sci-fi and horror, especially when it came to other writers. You'd be amazed where he sort of turns up randomly.
Yeah, it's good stuff, though.
Oh, yeah.
I guess, should we just get into it then?
Yeah, let's.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dead Formats, a movie podcast where sometimes I can't come up with anything more clever to say than we talk about obscure shit. So I'm your host, Chris, and this episode we're going to be discussing Colony Mutation from 1995. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, a man whose name is up there with Einstein and Jesus. Dan, how are you doing this evening?
I'm loving my intro. It's very very nice. Usually I'm the one to say I'm Jesus, so it's nice for somebody else to throw that out there. I'm doing good. It's great to be back on. I was just saying before we started recording that it seems like ages since we last spoke.
I know.
And those many moons ago during Star Crystal when you were living a different life. So
yeah. So Dan is a film critic and YouTuber for his channel TYTD Reviews. So Dan, tell the listeners a little bit about what you do.
Certainly. So my channel, as mentioned, is TYTD Reviews, and basically we sort of take a analytical look at forgotten films, cult cinema, strange oddity pieces, and we try not to just sort of look at it on a surface level. I try my best to kind of take the film apart, analyse what worked, what didn't work, sort of trace its inspirations, things like that. With the aim, really, to sort of discuss it from a more analytical level, to sort of piece together how it maybe could have been better, and sort of what sort of things make it the way that it is. We also have a series called The Red Triangle, which does very similar stuff, but with a more adult-oriented sort of theming. And when I'm not doing that, I'm doing some streams with various other people playing various sort of games like Rift Tracks or What the Dub, which is quite good. So.
Yeah. One thing I feel like we're kind of kindred spirits in a way of, one thing I've always enjoyed about your channel is the way that you meet a film on its own terms. You're not usually watching something that you would assume is high art, but that doesn't stop you from giving it the same attention that, Le Samurai would be given or something like that.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I find a lot of people look at contemporary, sort of the latest big mainstream films and then try and compare films like Colony Mutation to them. And it's a bit like an apples and oranges situation, really. So I try and approach everything that I review from the perspective of somebody wanted to make this. Because I don't think anybody's ever really completed a film that from the moment they started it, they didn't want to do it. Somebody somewhere had to believe in it to get it to the end. And that's where I kind of meet it. And then for better or worse, we take it apart and see exactly what the damage was with it. So yeah.
Yeah. Definitely check that out. Check out the episodes on the commentary on Chick Boxer or House of Wax. No reason in particular why you'd want to check those out, but I encourage you to do so.
Absolutely. We had some stunning guests for that one, naming no names.
So our dead format for this week is 8mm films, and the movie, like I said, is Colony Mutation from 1995. But before that, I'd like to give a little bit of a backstory on how and why I started this podcast, and it's all going somewhere, but just bear with me for a few minutes. So nearly 6 years ago at this point, I started my first podcast. It was called Channel 83, and it was sort of an aimless guy talks about horror movies podcast, and it was a solo podcast. And the reason for that is I had originally planned on doing it with a friend, but they very quickly became disinterested, and it was kind of a, now or never sort of scenario. So I decided to just forge ahead and do it myself. And it was a good experience. I did learn a lot about how to edit a podcast and all that. Met some good people along the way, like Dan. But it wasn't too far into it that I sort of realized that the concept didn't really work as a solo podcast, but that didn't stop me from doing it for 2 years anyway. So I did that, took a few years off, and about a year and a half ago, I wanted to get back into doing something and toyed around with concepts that I thought might be interesting and that could be done solo. And that turned into a sort of limited series podcast called Mount Molehill. I think it mostly worked, but each episode was just so much effort to put together that by the end of it, I just knew that there was no way I could continue doing it and stick to any sort of consistent release schedule. And also, it wasn't a movie podcast in any way, but I did notice that so many of the potential topics I was coming up with for episodes of that show were movie related. So that's when I started thinking about doing another movie podcast, which eventually became the show that you are listening to now. And I knew two things. One, I'm not going to be able to find a permanent co-host for this thing. It's too niche, too esoteric. I don't know anyone that would be interested in talking about this sort of stuff on a semi-regular basis. And two, that I did not want to do another solo podcast that's just me talking. So the obvious solution to that is to have a guest or guests on every episode. So when I was planning out episodes for the show, that's sort of what I started with, is a list of people I would like to have on at some point. And then from there, I tried to think of topics to discuss that would not only fit in with the type of show that I want to create, but that would also mesh with the potential guests and their interests. And the point of telling the story is all to lead up to this question, which is, Dan, how does it feel that when I landed on covering Colony Mutation, I didn't ever consider talking about it with anyone else? I thought, this has got to be Dan.
You know what? I feel honored. I feel privileged. I'm a little queasy, but you know what? It's very kind of you. You know what? My brief when I started doing what I do was I wanted people, when they think of films like Colony Mutation, they immediately think of me. So I'm glad that my brief has been met with this one. No, that's awesome. That's really good.
Met and exceeded, I would say.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
It's just, I hang out in the horror corner, obscure movies. And so I do know a lot of people that have more of a tolerance for films that are not that good. But there is a level below that, so far below something like Chopping Mall or even Star Crystal, that I really have a hard time convincing anyone that it's a good idea to watch it. But you...
I run towards the explosion.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you get into your wood chipper massacres and your chick boxers of the world,
right?
Yeah, that's my favourite kind of roadhouse. And to be honest, like I say, I this year for myself has been a very hectic and busy one, and I haven't had a lot of time to watch films. So when you messaged me to say, would I be interested in doing Colony Mutation? My first thought was, once I read what the basic premises of it was, this is perfect, because I'd been in a bit of a rut, sort of trying to figure out where I wanted to sort of start, because I've got so many movies to catch up on and go through. It was like you sort of plucked the perfect kind of option to help get me back into the swing of things. So yeah, no, it was very good of you to reach out when you did, because it really helped to reconnect me with my B-movie roots.
Yeah, and here's the thing, and I'm sure you probably feel the same way. People ask me all the time or comment, you watch so many terrible movies. But the thing is that I don't set out to watch terrible movies. I set out to watch things that may possibly be interesting to me. And those things just happen to more often than not be bad.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And this is the thing. I finding a bad movie nowadays is incredibly easy, because we live in a time where so many films are made as quickly, as cheaply, as, borderline as possible, and just released and just put out into the world. It was a little harder before companies like The Asylum or, independent companies like Sterling Entertainment is probably a good example, started just literally pumping out 10 to 20 films a month. But it doesn't really interest me to see films that are manufactured to be bad on purpose, or manufactured to just be a quick and cheap, here's a title, make a film about it kind of thing, because so many of them are just the same plot over and over and over again with very little kind of wiggle room. And it kind of ties back to what I mentioned earlier. My favourite ones are the films where somebody has produced something that they genuinely believed in at some point in the production process. There was some heart somewhere in it, and it just isn't quite right. It's just a click off being that vision that they want, whether it's because of budget or casting, or whether the director who can't act wanted to be the leading star in it, or something like that. There's just something that fundamentally did not stick with it, and that because of that one decision, it's now veered off into the most unusual of sort of cinematic oddities, and it's interesting, because you never quite know for sure what film is going to be just a 70-minute kind of padded waste of time, and what movie you're going to put on that's going to change your life, and it's going to be the next kind of 5 out of 5 film for you that you'll put on every year, and you'll get the friends round for a few beers and laugh and throw popcorn at the screen at it. So everyone is a roll of the dice. So that's what I quite like about it.
So I first saw this almost 4 years ago, and full disclosure, I had incorrectly remembered this as a shot-on-video film, which is partially why I asked Dan on the show to talk about it, because that's a genre that he has quite a bit of experience in. But when I started watching this a couple days ago, I quickly realized that I was mistaken, and Colony Mutation was shot on film, specifically Super 8. So I guess the question is, have you seen any... Are you really familiar with features shot on small format film like this?
So my knowledge of Super 8mm films is a little bit more limited than I would like. I've obviously seen some of the more notable 8mm offerings, such as Things and The Dead Next Door, and I think Ozone. No, Ozone was shot on video. J.R. Bookwalter did a series called Shocking Shorts, which was basically a compilation of all of the films that he made in his sort of teen years leading up to his SOV kind of Dead Next Door type adventures. And that was very good as well. And it's a very interesting format because when people think of film traditionally, they think of it kind of being almost like a limitless medium. So like when people think of a 16mm print or a 35mm print, they think, you can do 2, 4, 6, even 8K scans if you really wanted to, and you wouldn't really lose any resolution or picture image. But there is limitations with 8mm. You do start getting diminishing returns once you go above a 2K scan on it. So that, coupled with the fact that for a lot of filmmakers who were going into the SOV era, it was almost like a transitionary format. People would start on Super 8 because it was cheaper than buying a video camera and buying tapes and going through all of that kind of business. But it was also a lot more rudimentary. For example, as is the case with Colony Mutation, a lot of Super 8 cameras had no sort of built-in sound. Right. So you either had to do sync sound, which is then carrying around a load of audio equipment whilst you're filming, and Super 8 cameras are not the quietest cameras in the world, it needs to be said.
Yeah.
Or you have to become very creative and basically turn into your own Foley artist and start doing all of the audio as a redub, which is what Colony Mutation did. And also Things did that, and both of them are very similar in terms of the amount of effort that went into their redubbing. But yeah, no, it's an interesting format. I probably would say that there are almost certainly the better examples of 8mm haven't yet really been properly released in a digital format. A lot of it is still trapped on tape or trapped on film prints that have sort of been cycled round. It's almost a little bit like a forgotten format to an extent because SOV is so popular and had such a big impact from sort of the mid-80s onwards. And if it's not that, then obviously you've got your bog standard film, which most people shoot on 16mm for these kind of things. So 8mm's kind of the latchkey kid of the formats. Really, it's kind of just the middle child. Yeah, it never quite hit the highs that the other two formats around it would attain. So
yeah, I think also with the sort of people that are into collecting these boutique label things, I think shot on video just. It's easier to understand. Like when you say shot on video, I think people have a certain expectation of what that might be like, but saying shot on Super 8, they may not really even know what that is or what that would mean in terms of how it was produced or what type of person would produce it. So I can see that. Yeah. And I think I knew I was going to ask you this question, so I kind of tried to figure out if I had seen any feature-length films shot on 8mm, and it was actually hard to even find a list of them because every list I could find was SOV/8mm, like movies shot on SOV and or 8mm with no like distinction between the two. So I maybe have seen, I think the movie Cutting Moments maybe partially was shot on 8mm, but that's not feature length. So I think this might be the only one that I've seen.
Well, I mean, this was the thing, really. At the time that this film came out, 8mm was a long sort of finished format. SOV had been the sort of dominant filming format probably since the late 1980s, 88, 89, I would say. So it's difficult because SOV primarily, when you sort of 8mm primarily, when you kind of think about it, it's mainly home movies, silent home movies, or the other sort of option for it, which was a sort of popular way to distribute films before VHS, was supercuts. You would get, like, say, for example, an 8mm highlights of the Rocky Horror Picture Show or highlights of The Wizard of Oz, and it was just a kind of thing you could play to watch the film.
I actually have one for the movie The Snake movie.
Yeah. Oh, yes, really?
Yeah. I can see it from here. It's a little 8mm, like supercut, like you said. It's pretty beat up. Like I did put it in a projector when I first got it, and it's completely red. Like, I mean, you can see what's on the film, but it's completely tinted red because whoever had it before me was not storing it properly.
Yeah, it's the joys of the format, unfortunately. I mean, you'd be amazed at what sort of film restorers can do with that kind of red footage now. I mean, I don't know, there's a bit of a tangent actually, but I don't know, have you seen the Game of Clones Bruce Lee box set that Severin put out last year?
I haven't.
It's a big box set of Bruceploitation films. They did sort of all of the sort of big hitters of the genre, but the one that piqued my interest, as you'll probably know, is a film called The Dragon Lives Again.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they rescanned it in 2K, I want to say it was, and they restored it, but like you've said with it was a completely dyed red print. It was like there's only 2 prints that exist of that film anymore. But they've done astounding work. You wouldn't have known that it was basically completely red.
Wow.
from how they've remastered it. So, there may be hope for your printlet yet. Although, in fairness as well, I mean, you got lucky you could have ended up with a copy of Curse of the Puppet Master.
Yeah.
Which...
no one wants that.
No, it's basically but made of wood.
Yep. I guess I wanted to pick your brain a little bit more on this since you do have a background in film production and all that. What do you make of this movie? It's 1995. Usually I think, okay, film is like, this is going to be a more legitimate production, but then they do it on Super 8. And then also you see the quality of the movie. So it's like, you have to imagine they never would have deluded themselves into having any aspirations other than this going direct to video. So I guess what do you make of like this being shot on Super 8? It's very perplexing to me.
I did sit and think about this through the movie's runtime, and the only conclusion I could really draw from it was one of 2 scenarios. One was that the filmmaker in question knew how to edit Super 8 footage but didn't know how to edit tape, so he just shot on that because that was the only way he knew how to cut. The other option, which is a little bit more far-fetched, but if, you've got delusions of grandeur, I could totally believe you'd go down this route, is that by 1995, if you were particularly bedded into the tech community, the sort of conversations around high-definition images was becoming a much more stronger point. A case in point, Siskel and Ebert were discussing it in 1993, that within the next 10 years, high-definition television footage would be the norm. And even by 95, there were conversations around how videotape had limitations in terms of preservation and kind of upscaling to high definition and that kind of thing. So I could maybe believe if our writer-director here was very, very tech-savvy, that he thought, well, if I shoot on 8mm film has a better chance at translating to a high-definition format longer term than shooting on tape. But to be honest, if I was going to pick a theory, I'd probably go Occam's razor and just say he probably only knew how to cut on 8mm, and that was what he stuck with.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he just had one in his family from shooting home videos or something, so he's like, okay, I'll use this because I have it. But then it's like you would still think in 1995 buying a camcorder that uses full-size VHS is probably still cheaper than the amount of money it would cost to process a Super 8 film. I don't know.
Well, when I did my degree in film, the lecturer who I had was actually in the process of shooting a film on film. And he told me that in the 90s you could judge how much a film was going to cost because the cost of processing the film was roughly, for you guys, $1 a foot. So if you imagine it's a foot a second, you could literally start the camera rolling and go 1, 2, 3, 4, $5, $6, $7, 8, $9, $10. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what the budget for Colony Mutation was. All I can assume is that they did... Well, I say all I can assume. I know they didn't do retakes. It was very much a sort of Ed Wood approach, I imagine, to this film. It was one take and that was perfect for most of the production, largely due to cost. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super weird.
It's very strange. But as you say, for 95, I mean... realistically, by that point, what, a 5-pack of tapes would have been, being generous, probably, what, $15 maybe?
Yeah.
It wasn't exactly expensive. I know that tapes were quite expensive up to the turn of the early 90s, and cameras weren't terrifically expensive at that point. They were just starting to really come down. So, yeah, I mean, I can only assume, like you rightfully say, that maybe they just had one in the family that was available. But in doing that, they've kind of also made a rod for their own back because, like you say, you have to do the entire sound design yourself. Mm-hmm. So, you're probably going to have to pay out for decent sort of audio recorders, or at the very least, some kind of stock sound effects to dub your film over with. So,
yeah, I guess we'll never know because Colony Mutation was written, directed, and produced by Tom Berna. Couldn't find any information about him. No interviews, no commentary on the DVD. So he also has credits on this film as part of the camera and electrical department. And he appears as an actor in this film as Bum Number 1.
The finest of all the bums.
Yeah.
I did a bit of digging as well. The only information I could find is he had 7 acting credits, including this film. His last one was sort of the turn of the millennium, and that he'd done some work in sound design and sound department related sort of recordings. And I think this was either his first or his second credit for that. Other than that, the man's a mystery. He completely fell off the face of the earth. And whilst I was trying to find some information, any information about this film, the only thing I could find is that it had around about 130 logs on IMDb, and I was the 52nd log on Letterboxd for it.
Yes. This is one of those movies where I have the most upvoted review on Letterboxd by virtue of I was probably the first one to review it. Because like I said...
A fine job you did of it too.
Oh, thank you. It was 4 years ago, so if it's 52 now, it's probably considerably less then, because now this is on Tubi. So it's much easier to watch, but still, no one's watching it. But yeah, like you said, as best I can tell, there was just a short period of time in the mid to late 90s where seems like Tom Berna was involved with the regional Wisconsin independent filmmaking scene, and this is just a result of that. Really not much to go on.
No. In terms of the history of this film, the only other piece of information that I could find was that the DVD release and eventual digital release that is on Tubi was distributed by a company called Visual Vengeance, who I believe did a release called Split, which was a film I covered on my channel years ago that I really enjoyed. It was a very surreal art house film that was directed by a mathematician. He'd never made films in his life. He just did maths. And then
I do remember
to make a film.
Your review of that and thinking it seemed interesting.
Oh, it's a trip for sure. I'm in the very privileged position of I picked up a haul of tapes a couple of years ago now, and just randomly in there was a US copy of Split, which, given it was quite a deep cut title for the US market, somehow a copy made it to England. I don't know, but it's on my shelf right now. I think they also did the distribution for Woodchipper Massacre, which I know is one of your favourites as well. But yeah, and I don't know whether you want to go into this as, this soon in or not, but the version that is on Tubi and the version that is more readily available has been somewhat tampered with.
Yeah, so we can talk about this. So there's at least 3, possibly 4 distinct versions of this film. So it sounds like you watched the Tubi one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that one runs about 77 minutes. I think it's only been on Tubi for 4 months because Visual Vengeance, they did something with it where they upgraded it and released it solely to streaming. It's not really a process I'm familiar with, but I'm sure they're making 25 cents a year off of putting this on Tubi. Who knows? But so I originally watched this on what is a very poor DVD rip from a DVD released by the now defunct Apprehensive Films in 2007. That version runs about 82 minutes.
Oh, blimey.
The title shortened to just Colony, but I did see that there's a different DVD version released by the same company called Colony of the Dark. And then there's also a VHS of this, and on the back, it lists the runtime as 85 minutes. So it seems that with each new release, the film is getting shorter and shorter.
I'm actually amazed that it ran longer.
Oh, yes.
It very much felt like one of those films where, like, if they'd had any sort of accidental, the camera was running footage, they'd have put it in there just to get it up to runtime. So the fact that there are deleted scenes...
Well, so that's the thing. I did give this, when I watched it, a 0.5 star on Letterboxd, which puts it down there with like about 4 or 5 other films. Like, I don't give out a lot of 5 stars. I also don't give out a lot of 0.5 stars because most things fall in between that, and most things are just sort of whatever. And I think, this time around I watched the Tubi version. I did not hate it as much. I would say I don't actively hate this movie, just that I don't think on a technical level it's any good in any way, really.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. It wasn't one that I watched and was like, 0.5 star, this is terrible, but I suppose unremarkable is kind of the vibe it gives off. It's just one of them where the credits rolled and I was kind of like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, all right, then fair enough.
Like I said, so this time I watched the Tubi version because the version I had is terrible. You can't see half the movie because it is ripped from a DVD, but it's also like been shared around. So it has a bunch of like compression, pixelation all over the place. But I did do about a 30 minutes of side-by-side comparison with DVD versus Tubi. Not the whole thing, because there's no way I was going to watch this 3 times in a matter of 2 days. But the main difference is that, a different title sequence and just tighter editing. There aren't any different scenes. It's just, as much as the version on Tubi, the shots linger too long, they linger even longer on the DVD version, so much so that they were able to cut out a full 5 minutes of the movie by just taking off a second here and there.
God. Wow.
Yeah. So
that's amazing.
It's impressive.
This was the thing. I mean, when I was watching the Tubi version, the only thing that really jumped out at me was, obviously from the sounds of it, they did a good job, at least with the edit, in terms of, making it more succinct.
Yep.
My issues with it predominantly were what I'm going to call the enhancements that they've chosen to make with it. So, for example, they have cropped it from what would have been a full frame kind of 4:3 ratio into widescreen, which means there are moments where you lose the top and bottom of the screen, and it also really negatively impacts the framing. There's a lot of shots where I'm sort of looking at them and going, why is it framed like that? And then I realised it's because about a third of the picture on the top and bottom's missing. So they've just kind of made it fit as best as they can.
Yep.
The colour correction choices as well, they've regraded the film in places to try and, I assume, give it a bit more atmosphere. But their grading basically consisted of either turning the picture a sort of very muddy brown and then just kind of leaving it like that for a while, or in the final act and in the final scene of the final act in particular, just tinting the whole film blue for some reason.
Yeah.
Like a really dark blue. Which, given that part of the film especially had some very interesting kind of... I hesitate to use the word chiaroscuro lighting because that implies he chose to do it that way, but very kind of low experimental lighting, very atmospheric. Putting that blue filter on just basically crushed detail out of the image. So
yeah,
I was watching it on the screen and basically it was just like a blue screen, and occasionally you might see a close-up of an eye kind of very quickly swish past the screen, and then that would be it. They also put some CGI. I say CGI. It looks like basically animated Photoshop images in occasionally to try and put some new visual effects in.
So some of that stuff is in actually the DVD version, and one of his credits was as a CGI artist. So I wonder if he was just one of the few people that had the skill and means to do that back in 1995, or if it was added in 2007 and that's part that carried over into the Tubi version.
Possibly it could be. I mean, I could believe that maybe the stuff that's in the 2007 is some kind of upscaled version. Maybe like put it back into a modern version of the stuff and re-exported it at a higher resolution. The editing software from 95 would have been maybe a little too rudimentary for that kind of higher quality, because it's a noticeable shift between the 8mm footage and the sort of computer generated stuff.
Yeah, one of the things that they definitely inserted in the Tubi version is they show like a close-up of stopwatches. Like that sort of thing is not in the 2007 version. They will just show you an actual stopwatch. I don't know why they chose to add that.
Yeah, no, this is it. And there were just a lot of moments where I kind of went, oh, all right, okay, well, why have you done that? Like the intro title cards, I'm pretty confident the original 95 release of it didn't feature sort of twirling DNA strands with the credits in Times New Roman. It's with very atmospheric music, but
yeah, that part is definitely better on the DVD. It's like kind of just abstract lights with pretty much the same titles going on, but it's, just a green double helix spinning around is not fun to watch for 2 minutes.
No, I added it all up, and this thing has 6 minutes of titles and credits altogether, which is when you film 77 minutes long. It's not quite the atrocity of Humanoids from Atlantis, J.R. Bookwalter's final SOV film from his 6-pack that he did, where I think it's a half an hour long film and it has 10 minutes of credits.
Wow.
Yeah, you really need to get the runtime up on that one. But yeah, I mean, on the whole, I didn't hate the enhancements, but they were the things that for me brought the film down a little bit, because, if I'm watching something like this, I personally prefer the kind of rough and ready look. I'm quite happy to watch a film from 1995, and if the effects aren't great, well, that's kind of the selling point for me.
Yeah.
So when these kind of enhancements happen, and this film isn't a lone example. There are plenty of SOV films where they've gone back and added digital effects or updated the titles and credits or re-edited it or all these various bits and pieces. But I often find that every attempt to do that, with only one exception, which is the uncut version of Boarding House, which runs to 2.5 hours long, which was just mind-melting because it was re-edited on Windows Movie Maker, of all things. Wow. I often come away a little disappointed when they go back and try and kind of modernise these older kind of 8mm SOV features, because I like them warts and all. That's my kind of thing. I just like to be able to see what was. And if they want to do it as a supplemental thing, then, absolutely. If you want to do a special edition or something that's like you can watch this alongside it, fine. But that was one of the only things that really hit me as a bit disappointing with this one, was just, I would have liked to have seen it a little bit more in its original format. Yeah.
In terms of the color grading, I would kind of say it's 6 in one, half dozen in the other, because I don't think, in just normal scenes, I don't think either of them have a very natural color palette. And then in the darker scenes, like you were talking about, the version I have is just, you can't see shit. So you can't really compare either of them, because it's like, is that, a compression algorithm that's been run on this? Someone uploaded it to YouTube and downloaded it and uploaded it again? Or is that truly the way it looks on the DVD? So really, with the color grading is kind of a toss up. I don't think either version that I've seen gets it right.
And I mean, another thing as well that kind of got the gears whirring, and I wasn't entirely, even having watched it, I wasn't entirely sure whether this was the case or not, is I couldn't figure out whether the 8mm footage that was shot was what they used to create this new version, or whether they just pulled it off of a VHS copy, like whether they finished the 8mm footage on tape and then went back to the tape to restore it for the DVD and Tubi versions, or whether they actually bothered to restore it from whatever the 8mm master would have been for this, if an 8mm master even exists of it.
Yeah,
because
I feel like they had to have done something, because the DVD version, you can see interlacing. So you would feel like the DVD version was pulled from some sort of tape source. Like maybe they just got the commercial release of the movie and slapped it on a DVD.
Yeah, I know that's quite a common thing. A lot of those 8mm films would be finished on tape, and then that master tape would then be what would dub the copies that would be distributed. So it wouldn't surprise me to find out that the 8mm rushes or the original 8mm master that was used to dub the tape no longer exists. But it's weird. Like I say, the only other film I've ever had any kind of experience of that sort of thing with is, it's one of the first SOV films, is Boarding House, where it was shot on tape, and they did the opposite. So rather than it being a film production that got dubbed to tape and then they've used the tape for every master thereafter, with Boarding House, they shot it all on tape, and then because they wanted it to play in theatres, and theatres couldn't project VHS footage at that point, they had to basically make a 16mm print of the master tape that they cut together, and then they'd make dupes of that 16mm print. So you had a 16mm copy of a 16mm print that was a videotape dubbed onto film. But I imagine for this, it was a little bit easier going the other way around, just editing it on film and then dubbing it to tape. Yeah.
One of the many mysteries of Colony Mutation.
It's very much the Onion of the 8mm world. A lot of layers.
Yeah.
A lot of layers.
Speaking of mysteries, one thing to point out is that of the 25 credited actors in this film, only one of them has a headshot on IMDb, and I think maybe only 5 of them have acting credits other than Colony Mutation, and it's all for stuff that is equally as obscure as this film is.
It's got to be a testimony to the Midwestern film industry.
Yeah. It stars Joan Dinko as Jenny Dole, David Rommel as Jim Matthews, Anna Zizzo as Meredith Weaver, and Susan L. Kane as Suzanne Dole. Those are, I guess, the main characters of the movie.
Pretty much. I'm very disappointed we didn't get to find out who bum number 2 was.
Yeah, I didn't write that one down. He is credited though, so
well, that's good at least.
Look him up.
Yeah, I'll have a dig. I'll have to have a dig. This is the thing though, when you get into these, let's say, I don't want to say ramshackled because that makes it sound a bit worse than it is, but these lower-fi productions, the sort of documentation is significantly less coherent.
Right.
Like, you get these actual SOV filmmakers, people like who work for Sterling or Make Flicks or Troma even, and you'll have production files, you'll have scripts, you'll have casting call sheets, you'll have all of the kind of paperwork you need to make a film. And then you probably get to Colony Mutation, where the script was probably written on a napkin that was used at the diner the day they went to go and film. And, the cast were probably paid with breakfast, dinner, and a drive home.
If that.
Yeah, so it becomes increasingly difficult to kind of piece these films together. It only really seems like the auteur filmmakers, the ones like your Barry J. Gillises of the world, who bothered to kind of really, really keep track of every possible detail of their film productions, but, the people who made Colony Mutation very likely just sort of made it and then sort of hid it in a closet for 20 or 30 years until it got distro again.
Yep. Which is where we find ourselves today. So, let's get into the plot of this thing, and if you can call it that. So the movie begins, as we said, with 2-minute long title sequence of DNA strands twisting to the tune of some industrial droning. We then cut to a short scene of a woman walking through a house with a gun. She doesn't say anything and fires at something off screen. We then get an intertitle reading Gendesk Corporation 3 weeks ago. So
at first I was intrigued, and then it just kept going. It was one of those where I was like, okay, woman with a gun, dark apartment, nice bit of lighting, fair enough. And then nothing was happening, and it just kept going, and eventually I was like, what is anything going to happen? And then, you get the shooting at something off screen, cut to black, and I'm like, oh, okay, right, fair enough. But yeah, it's immediately I kind of started to get the vibe that this was going to be one of those films where the feature runtime was a goal rather than a rather than a guarantee.
Right. Yeah. So after that, we get an exterior shot of the Gendesk Corporation, footage of a man walking through a hallway and into a laboratory. We see a nondescript scientist doing nondescript science work. We see something on a shelf labeled reagents for RNA work. We see a woman looking into a microscope. We see something that I couldn't even tell what it is, but it looks like an extreme close-up of one of those old school bubble light Christmas decorations. And, we get more nondescript science stuff and more walking through a hallway before we are introduced to our main character, Jim Matthews, with an abrupt cut to an office where a guy says some generic business stuff about needing a report on his desk by 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Yes. And two of the immediate red flags that popped up for me during that sequence. The first was when we were introduced to the two scientists who were doing their nondescript science activities. Neither of their mouths were moving, but dialogue was happening, which had me for a second, because I'm sort of sitting there thinking, well, hang on a minute, they're supposed to be talking. Why is their mouths not moving on this one? That was at that point I realised that it was going to be entirely redubbed and that the whole film was going to basically just be like a manufactured soundscape, that they had no on-set audio.
Yep.
My other highlight was that the female scientist doing the experiments couldn't pronounce the word genome.
Yeah.
She kept saying it was a genome or genome.
Yep.
Which
sure did.
Which was great. Graphic rat dissection as well, lovely, which was less appealing, especially given that they seem to have started doing the grading nice and early, because this was a very murky. It was reminding me of some of Ray Dennis Steckler's adult film work. It was that level of sort of grimy, seedy, green sickiness.
Yeah.
It was already establishing quite a presence in the opening moments already.
Yeah, so during this part, we are introduced to Meredith Weaver, who's another scientist. Jim runs into her in the hallway, and she's on her way to record another experiment. We find out through, I guess, quote-unquote playful banter that that's actually Jim's wife. And then we meet his receptionist/secretary, Jenny Dole. No idea what her actual job is, but she's introduced via more generic science talk about some scientists needing part 5 of a report done with revisions, but they're not actually revisions, because Jim has cleverly inserted a post-it note in the report that reads, "Lunch? I get out at 12, same place." So it appears that Jenny's real job is being Jim's mistress.
Shock horror, big reveal.
Yeah.
Again, much like yourself, that bugged me for most of the runtime. I was kind of sitting there trying to figure out exactly what her job was, because at first I thought secretary, but then they mention a few times throughout the film that she has a little bit more of a scientific background, but they don't go into detail about exactly what that is. So then I'm thinking maybe an apprentice or an assistant, maybe PA possibly, but they never really reveal it, which is very disappointing, because I was just sat there going, well, I don't know what's going on now. Mistress is probably it's probably the closest to a full-time profession here that she gets, because whenever she's on screen in the lab environment, she's just basically moving stacks of paper from one desk to another and picking the phone up occasionally. And I must say she has some of the most interesting phone acting that I've seen. I don't know whether it was just bad editing on the sort of filmmaker's part, or whether it was just that she couldn't get timings right, but the amount of time she'd sort of pick a phone up and then there'd be a very long pause, and then she'd just say like a word and then put the phone down again.
Yeah, and this is something we're going to talk about throughout this, but this movie has a huge preoccupation with people talking on the phone, so...
Another great padding exercise. If in doubt, get a lengthy phone conversation going on.
Yeah, so I think this is kind of where you first get the flavor of like what this movie's going to be like, because you see a note that says, "Lunch, I get out at 12, same place." And then it just smash cuts to the scene of them having lunch abruptly.
And this was the thing, with it being a enhanced version, that was one of those moments where I was like, is there supposed to be a scene in between there? Is that part of the enhancement that they, I was trying to figure out at this point in watching, I was still trying to figure out whether it was just the filmmaker not really getting pacing and nuance, or whether it was just some editor further down the line trying to do a Redux version where they're just like, oh, there's a lengthy walking to lunch scene, we'll just chop it out, smash cut, job done.
Yeah, it's the former rather than the latter, because that is yeah.
Oh, but the extended walking to lunch scene was my favourite scene.
Yeah. Well, that's okay, because they left in all of the extended walking through hallway scenes.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. I shall keep those to heart.
Yeah. While they're at lunch, they discuss Jenny's jealousy over Meredith, while Jim maintains that Meredith will not find out about the affair as long as he gets to the mailbox in time. Spoiler alert, we'll find out later he does not get to the mailbox in time. And we go back to Meredith in the lab. As she mentioned previously, she's going to videotape an experiment. There's yet another scientist here. I think his name ends up being Kelly. And Meredith asks, as you said, how's the genome project going? To which the other scientist responds, once I prove that this is the gene that causes penis size, my name will be up there with Einstein and Jesus. So is this a joke, or is this actually what the corporation is trying to do? I was very unclear on that.
You know what? I think it's open to audience interpretation. I personally would think it was hilarious that this company's two main aims were penis size increasing or decreasing and creating John Carpenter's The Thing.
Yeah. It's very hard to tell because they don't explain what the purpose of the experiment is at all. We just watch this guy fiddle around with a dead rat for 2 minutes. He injects it with something called proteum batch number 607. And Meredith has a quote that is,
pseudopod formation at 16.75 seconds. This batch has the same problem as the last two. Instead of rebonding the flesh of the test subject, the serum has created a coexistent symbiote of the left limb amputated. When the anesthetic wears off, the symbiote will act as the subject's limb in return for the subject's body feeding it. My assistant has termed these coexistent parasites a colony.
So it's very plot dumpy, but at the same time, is it? Because it actually doesn't mean everything she just said means nothing.
This is it. It's just words. It's a bit like automatic writing. It's just somebody speaking a load of words, whether they make sense or not. It's not really a thing because it doesn't add anything to the actual plot. The only thing I picked up on, and I might be misremembering this, was I do recall them very briefly, and I say this in the heaviest of words, that they very lightly say something about the experiment causing regeneration of tissue or something to help support movement. That I think there's some discussion that they have back and forth about if you chop a leg off and this parasite is in you, it will grow a new leg and control it for you or something, but that again doesn't help explain the plot. That's just a thing that happens. Whether it's relevant to what the actual experiment is, I don't know. Yeah, at this point, I was kind of very lost, and hoping that we'd get back to some more sort of common ground. Maybe the affair will give us some better answers, or at least some grounding.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the times I find this sort of thing charming, like in Star Crystal, for example, or Extro 2, they talk about duo tangent a lot, or in a movie that was covered on an earlier episode of this show, Biotherapy, where the MacGuffin is this GT medicine, and they just keep saying it even though it has no meaning. But I feel like this got to a point where I just like, this is not charming. Like, I just had to throw my hands up and give up.
Yeah, no, and you know what? Fair play. If the film isn't willing to sort of hold a hand out and take you on the journey, you are more than welcome to throw your hands up and say, whatever. I'm just going to see where you take it yourself.
Yeah. So anyway, Meredith gets home. She finds a credit card bill in the mail. She sees a bunch of charges for a Holiday Inn in Murphyville. She calls the credit card company to confirm the charges. And this is how she discovers that Jim has been cheating on her. So he knew he was going to stay at the office late that night. I don't know why he thought he would get to the mailbox before her, but as I said earlier, he didn't.
Absolutely. And I will say the conversation that Meredith has with her banking company was as thrilling as the 5 minutes they chose to allocate to it. I'm very surprised they didn't put a "yes, I'll hold" and then just her holding the phone in silence for a minute and a half to try and get a bit more
so
padding put on there.
We're, I don't know, probably less than 10 minutes at this point. So far, there's been at least 2 phone conversations, so I'll try to keep a running tally of that because it happens a lot.
Oh, yeah.
We then cut to Jenny and Jim in bed at a Holiday Inn as they reminisce about how they first met and talk about what their future together will be like after Jim leaves Meredith. Jim leaves the hotel, and we get a very long scene of him walking and some guy in a car taking pictures of him.
I was going to say as well, also an extended conversation about wanting or not wanting to have children, which gets weirdly personal. Like, there's moments where I'm sitting there thinking, is this the director trying to tell somebody something? Or, I was just having visions of him like finishing the film and going around to his girlfriend's place and just rewinding and playing that scene over and over again, because it was very clear that Jim was not interested in kids at all, and that his secretary very much was. Which is great if you're, in the process of having an affair with somebody where you're thinking of leaving them for the other person. So, but yeah, that particular scene, it was a little too involved from a sort of writing perspective. Given this film is incredibly hands-off in wanting to really give you any information, that's the one bit where I kind of sat there and went, hang on a minute, this is getting a little bit too detailed. Is the director trying to tell us something, or tell maybe his girlfriend something?
Yeah. It's strange for sure. And so after we see the guy taking pictures of Jim, we do another smash cut to what I guess is the second chief preoccupation of this film, which is scenes of people eating at restaurants. This occurs 10 days after we had just seen them in a hotel. We know this not because there's any visual indication that time has passed, but because Jenny flat out says something like, "It's been 10 days since I've seen you."
Yeah. And I get that they wanted to try and amp up the tension a little bit, because obviously the idea at this point is Jim is being followed by some kind of private investigator, and Jim is aware that there is a private investigator following him. But there are more tactful ways, I think, that you could probably do that. Just having the secretary flat out go, "It's been 10 days, why haven't you been?" is just writers 101, you got to at least... I mean, it wouldn't have hurt, given, the medium they're shooting on, it wouldn't have hurt to maybe even just done a little bit of a montage of him driving around and being followed and some, clear backing and forth in between the two of them to show a bit of passage of time. But no, this film is to the point, almost to its own detriment, and it was, like you say, just a smash cut to, "Where have you been?" It's like, that 2 minutes ago was in a Holiday Inn, but,
Yeah, I mean, they also, the first intertitle, rather than saying 3 weeks earlier, they could have just said 5 days earlier, and then they don't have to, because they're just completely omitting 10 days of the plot, which is, more than a third of the time between, the beginning of the film and the end that were shown at the beginning of the film. It's like, you didn't really need to say it was 3 weeks.
Well, they needed the 10 working days so that Meredith's credit card bills could come back as verified. So she was on the phone the whole time.
They're arguing again about Jim leaving Meredith. Jim says that Meredith has been keeping a really close eye on him. When Jim gets back to the office, he finds a note on his desk from Meredith that says, "Meet me in the lab." When he gets there, Meredith confronts him and asks him if he's been boning Jenny Dole. He at first tries to deny it, but she shows him the photographs that she hired an investigator to take of him outside the hotel 10 days prior. Jim still tries to deny it, and Meredith splashes him in the face with protium batch number 607, and Jim still denies that he's having an affair with Jenny.
Oh, God. Lab safety going to the wall. That being said, it was the 90s, so, probably lab tech was a little less careful. But, yeah, and this was the point where I was really still trying to get a measure of the film, and I feel like through all three of the acts that make up this film, I came away with three very different sort of thoughts about what the influences for the film were. So kind of up to this point, I was leaning more towards it being a kind of aiming to be more of a typical kind of low budget sci-fi film that was inspired by things like maybe like The Thing or something of that kind of era. And then the second act winds, it sort of revs up, and it's, I mean, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but essentially it's just murder and sort of sexual abuse for like 25, 30 minutes.
Yep.
Which was very much out of left field, given, the sort of very pedestrian opening act that kind of happened. So then I was kind of thinking, well, maybe there's a kind of, I don't know, sort of reference exploitation-esque edge to STDs here or something, being a bit more parasitic driven. Another thing I noticed throughout the whole of this film, but it starts creeping in around about here, there's a lot of Henenlotter references dotted throughout. There's a lot of kind of just not necessarily like direct lines or like Easter eggs, so to speak, but like just references in the cine, references in the style of dialogue chosen. Just little moments where you kind of sit there and go, oh, that feels a bit like Brain Damage, or oh, that feels a bit like Bad Biology. Whether he was actually influenced by it or whether it's just, something that came out of the natural film process, I couldn't say. But, they were the two big things for me, especially up to this point, was there's a little bit of Henenlotter in this, which was welcome. In a sea of phone calls and going to lunch, a few scenes that made me think of Frank Henenlotter were very, very welcome.
Yeah, I agree. So there we get a brief scene of Jenny in a parking garage. A weird mugger guy attempts to attack her with a crowbar. She just says, "Don't," and pulls a gun on him. And I think the sole purpose of this is to explain why later on there's a gun. Maybe, I think. Because if that's not the purpose, there is no purpose to this scene.
To be honest, I hadn't put two and two together until you just mentioned that. To me, this scene felt so random and out of place. It was the closest to a Python-esque moment. It's just like this guy sort of runs up with a crowbar, gun, runs away, and it's that fluid. It's like, there's not like even a moment, a beat pause where it's like, oh crap, a gun. It's literally just, give me your money, gun, run. And nothing comes of it. It's not like that mugger turns up later in the film, or like Jane mentions that it's happened or anything. That scene is dead the second the mugger runs off. So, like, now that you mention it, that is probably the only reason that's there is, like you say, so that a gun can turn up in the final act. But in that moment, I audibly, like, spat laugh. I was like, what? Because it was just the timing of the editing on it was just so ridiculous. Yeah. It was great. It was really well-timed comedy.
Unintentionally.
Oh, yes.
So back at Jenny's apartment, Jim's waiting for her. As Jim embraces Jenny on the couch, we get a strange musical cue, and Jim begins to rub his eyes. We then see a hallucination of Jenny from Jim's perspective. Why? Who knows?
Very quickly followed up by a extended sequence of him wandering through some woodlands, and that weird arty sex scene that happens.
Yes, please walk us through the sex scene.
So it's set in the Phantom Zone, seemingly. It's just a black void.
Yes, one of my favorite settings.
Oh, yes. It's the we ran out of money Batman 66 of set dressing. It's got a red spotlight that is placed at a diagonal angle at all times. It's never any other way. It's always at like a 45-degree angle from the ceiling down. And it could best be described as a mass of pixels kind of vaguely writhing about on top of each other, and occasionally you see a head or an arm or a bit of a body part. It's simultaneously featuring nudity and no nudity because you don't see anything. It's just people's backs for about 2.5, 3 minutes with, again, quite an industrially styled drone, if memory serves, just running in the background for the majority of it. In my notes, because I was typing notes whilst I was watching it, I literally wrote, Ray Dennis Steckler's Nazi pornos were framed and looked more pleasurable than this. Again, I can't tell whether it's the Redux that has caused problems with the film or whether it just never looked good to begin with. It could be both. But the framing of every scene during that sequence was really weirdly cropped. It was like it wasn't centered, it wasn't like slightly off-centered, it wasn't following the rules of thirds of sort of cine and compositional choices.
Right.
It was kind of, it was weird. It was like it was artificially Dutched and moved ever so slightly too far off to the right, and the top with the top and bottom of the frame being cut off, it meant that you'd just regularly get like, it starts on people's eyebrows and goes down rather than getting the tops of their heads because they're missing because the top of the frame's chopped out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a very, very wobbly experience all in. And I think it's a mixture of the director not being able to really get what he wanted on the day, but also then when they've reduxed it, them not reframing the shot appropriately.
I mean, as you said, there's not really any nudity in it, but we do get lingering shots of Jim's orgasm face, which is what we all wanted.
Oh yes, absolutely. Oh lummy. That was exactly what I wanted after a hard day's work, was to see. It was more of a grimace, really, than an orgasm face,
because that's the thing, though, is like you start watching this movie and you see him walking through the hall, and your first thought is, I wonder what he looks like when he's having an orgasm. And
oh yeah,
thankfully they answer that for you,
which was very kind of them. I hope they never do it again. To quote The Simpsons, it's going to replace the whale in my nightmares.
Jim lies in bed after having sex with Jenny, and he has a dream about strolling through the woods and finding a hand buried in the ground. Why? Who knows? It just happens. Equally
not the best filmed either. Strangely off-center, weird colour choices, and the fact that you told me that they actually cut stuff out of this in previous versions astounds me, because like I say, whilst I was watching that sequence, I was thinking, wow, they really did struggle to hit feature runtime on this, didn't they? But now I know, wait, it could be worse. There's actually more that was taken out of it.
Yep.
So yeah, it was wild. That's wild.
Lots of in the longer version, lots of people stepping out of frame, and so the camera's just like pointing at a door for 8 seconds before it cuts. Lots of that going on.
Oh no.
So Jim gets out of bed, he goes to the fridge. I guess he starts to get a weird sensation in his arm, and as he reaches for a jug of milk, I guess his arm falls off. And he just goes, dreaming. Do you have any idea? Is that what happens? Like his arm falls off and he doesn't care?
Yeah. So, to be honest, at this point, I was still kind of baffled. It falls off and it kind of his arm runs off. It kind of does like a thing from the Addams Family and sort of scuttles away. I suppose what it's supposed to communicate to the audience is that there is a sense of unease coming, but the audience should already know that he's in trouble because he's been splashed in the face with the parasite. So I don't know, maybe it was for the hard of thinking in the audience, a kind of way for them to go, oh, something's up here, his arm's fallen off.
Wait a minute.
Yeah. And to be honest, it's a bit weird that they choose to do it when they do, because obviously the scene that follows this immediately is he wakes up and goes, oh, it's a dream. He tells his secretary, who he's been staying with, that he feels unwell, and she goes to sort of leave for work, but tells him to lock up when he leaves. At which point his arm starts being weird again, and if memory serves, he goes to the fridge and starts trying to find raw meat.
Yep.
Yeah.
We haven't really touched on this, but I feel like this is as good a point as any, because I couldn't help feel that our lead actor, David Rommel, is a glimpse into what Keanu Reeves' career would have been if Keanu wasn't just very good looking. Because this guy's voice and his fucking line reads throughout the movie, like in that scene afterwards in the morning, he's just like,
I feel a little sick today. Do you have some bacon or sausage around?
and they're atrocious, but it sounds an awful lot like Keanu Reeves.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. It's a unique one. I mean, his visual appearance, to me, there's a Canadian film that's it was very popular when it came out, and then it fell into obscurity, and it's picking up a bit of traction again now. It's called Skip Tracer.
Mm-hmm.
And the lead actor in that film looks exactly like this guy does, more or less. Mm. The only difference is the guy in Skip Tracer has a very kind of commanding voice. He's very kind of flat, but he's very forward. I don't think the surfer dude voice particularly suits Jim. Which again doesn't really help this film's case. That actually leads me to a bit of a broader point with this, which was tone. I don't entirely know what the tone of this film was aiming for.
Nope.
There are moments where I get the feeling it was trying to be a straight-cut, serious sci-fi film with horror elements, and that it was supposed to be a bit influenced by Cronenberg, a little bit influenced by films like Ozone from J.R. Bookwalter, and that it was trying to be straight cut. But then they do gag bits occasionally where I don't know whether it's just the delivery was wrong or whether it's, intentionally been done that way. But there are moments where you look at it and you go, that clearly is trying to be funny. So then I'm thinking, well, is it a sci-fi horror with a bit of comedy? Is it trying to do the Head and Lotter thing a bit more heavily? And it never quite commits to a lane. It never kind of nails its colours to the mast, so to speak. So you're kind of constantly left wondering, well, is this intentionally supposed to be a bit funny? Is it supposed to be serious? It doesn't help the film. It just leaves you kind of flailing from scene to scene, which in some ways makes it feel a little bit more avant-garde. But I don't necessarily know if I want that in my Midwestern films featuring men eating uncooked bacon.
It's a weird one, to say the least. So after Jim is eating said raw bacon, we go back to the Gendesk Corporation, where he's frantically rifling through filing cabinets for something. Why? Again, who knows? And he admits to Meredith that he has been cheating on her with Jenny, but if she can just cure him from the ill effects of protium batch number 607, they can patch things up and move on. And Meredith says,
"There is no cure, motherfucker. Rot in hell."
And for that, she must die. Jim starts slapping her, and 30 minutes into the movie, we get our first kill. Do you want to try and explain this kill, Dan?
Okay. So Jim starts beating Meredith repeatedly before slowly unbuttoning his trousers, and we don't see what's down there. The assumption, my assumption was it was a parasite.
Yeah.
It could be something else. And essentially, is there a tactful way to say skull fucks her to death? Because I don't... it's basically a murder-rape scene, almost.
And this is the biggest, brain damage riff of the movie.
Yeah, and it was... The problem, though, with it is that brain damage, again, kind of... The whole tone of Brain Damage is defined up front, that it's definitely got that black comedy, very dark humour element in place and running right the way through it. And because this film doesn't have that in place, this scene doesn't come across to me as a kind of jokey, maybe bad taste, but jokey kind of kill. It comes across as just very mean-spirited and a bit shocking. And you don't get anything like this again for the rest of the film. Every time that they lean toward, because there are more kills in this film, but every time they go to lead into it, they sort of enter a bit of a cycle where Jim just goes up to somebody, talks to them, offers to take them home, and then the next scene they're dead. They don't go into any detail. This is the only time you see it, and it's genuinely quite shocking for this film. But it also feels very out of place because of the fact they just don't do anything like this for the rest of the movie. So it's an interesting one. It's a brave choice. I don't think it paid off, but, to each their own.
Yeah.
One thing that did blow my mind a little bit was the soundtrack that plays during that scene is eerily similar to a couple of the soundtrack choices from the Barry J. Gillis 8mm film Things. For some reason, the soundtrack takes a massive dive in quality around this point, and it just goes to like a really cheap synthesizer just playing kind of whirring noises for about 2 or 3 minutes. Which, again, just made the thing all the more surreal, because I was kind of sitting there thinking of other films whilst this was going on.
Yeah, it was, one of a few very weird kills in this scene. So after that, we are introduced to Jenny's sister, Suzanne, via a riveting phone call, during which Suzanne chastises Jenny for dating a married man. Then Jim calls Jenny, and he says some stuff, and this was the point where I realized how much exposition of this film is presented in the form of a phone call.
Oh, absolutely. And this is the thing. I mean, whenever sort of filmmaking 101 is they always tell you to show, don't tell. They always tell you that the best way to put a message across to the audience isn't to just sit them down and tell them the plot. You can show it through the cinematography, you can show it through the visuals, show it through the direction. It can be a character's reaction to something. Subtle things help to tell the story. And it's clear that this filmmaker did not know that when he went to do this, because as you rightfully say, every single, I don't think 10 minutes goes by where there isn't a lengthy phone call that basically explains everything that's happened up to this point and then sets up the next 2 or 3 minutes worth of the film.
Yeah, and we should also point out that most of the phone calls between Jim and Jenny, they're in the same building. They just choose to call each other on the phone.
Which is especially weird after Meredith's death, because the only reason they were kind of creeping around in the first instance was because of Meredith. So now she's out of the way, you would think they would be able to sort of be a bit more, public. The assumption is that both actors weren't available on the same day, so they just filmed them both separately and then tried to cut it together. But, it was an interesting one.
Yeah, so after that series of phone calls, Jim wanders around on a beach. Again, why? Who knows? He goes into a coffee shop and starts chatting up a woman inside. And I think this is the first of a couple of times where there is a fade out and fade back in when a character is literally mid-sentence.
Yes. Yeah, it does happen a few times. And it kind of threw me because this is the start of what I'm going to call padding in the second act. And I know there's already been a lot of padding up to this point, but basically the film seems to get locked into a bit of a cycle over the next sort of 15, 20 minutes of the runtime of Jim going out, meeting somebody, talking to them extensively for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then that person being dead. And then Jim just kind of being a bit ill for a bit and then going out and doing it again. And like I mentioned earlier, they don't show much, if any, of the actual kills of these instances. It's just assumed that they're dead. It's weird. It feels almost unfinished. And it was around this time that I started to think of other 8mm films that I'd seen that kind of replicated. And there was one that stuck in my mind. It's a film called Nudist Colony of the Dead. Now, the thing that happened with that one is it was shot entirely on 8mm, but there was a processing fault with it, so they had to use a backup camera that was filming on videotape throughout for various bits, and then they had to stitch the two films together, so you'll have a scene where it was playing in 8mm up to a certain point, and then it'll just hard cut mid-sentence to a completely different scene that was shot on video from a slightly different angle because they didn't have the 8mm footage because the processing failed on it.
Right.
So when I was seeing these and it, like you say, it just sort of fades down to black mid-sentence. I was thinking, oh my God, has there been a processing issue? Is this is this a similar situation to Nudist Colony or, what was going on here? It's an interesting one. And it kind of, again, goes back to I wasn't entirely sure whether it was a fault with the director's original edit of the film or whether it was a visual vengeance redux issue, so to speak.
Yeah, who can say? But while Jim is talking to this woman, she goes to the bathroom. He gets a rumbly in his tumbly. He unbuttons his shirt to, I guess, feed the monster inside him a bit of a muffin. We don't really understand why until like the very last scene or sequence in this movie, why he does that. But Jim offers to walk the lady to her car. But when they get to her car, he attacks her. And like you said, that's how the rest of the movie goes. So because we don't see her death, just abruptly cuts to another scene of Jim in his office and another scene of a phone call between him and Jenny. And again, Jim invites Jenny to a restaurant. So we're ticking all the boxes right there. That's the bread and butter of this film. Phone calls and dinner plans.
I imagine this would make a fantastic drinking game.
Depends on your definition of fantastic, I guess.
Well, by the third act, you won't be able to see because you'll have consumed that much booze. So, phone call shot, restaurant shot, rumbly in the tumbly shot,
Jim invites Jenny to the restaurant. As he's driving to meet her, his stomach makes noises again. I guess his penis starts to move on its own. And then there's another abrupt cut to Jim putting some clothes in the trunk of his car. I do not understand that at all.
No, that I got lost with that one as well. It's weird, this particular section of the film leading into the hobo conversation that's coming up shortly. Mm-hmm. The whole thing is edited very weird. It feels more like scraps that were stitched together than an actual scripted sequence, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Very, very strange.
Because that cut to putting clothes in a car it reads as like, he's like coming after a woman, it fades to black, and then it cuts to that to imply that, he just killed someone. But it's not preceded by any such scene. So it's just a scene with no context of him putting clothes in the trunk of his car.
Yeah. Again, it's by this point in the runtime, I think I'd just kind of accepted that the film was just kind of going to do what the film wanted to do. It's just kind of like, okay, well, if I can't sort of engage with this film on a technical and scripting level, I'll have to just ride it for vibes and see where it takes me for the next half an hour or so.
Yeah. So as you said, he now finds two bums in an alley, one of which, as we talked about, is the genius behind Colony Mutation, Tom Berna. And one of the men asks Jim to spare some change. Jim takes off his pants. The man says, "Sir, I said I was hungry, but I'm not that hungry." And Jim throws a tentacle monster at the man that I guess is his leg, because he starts hopping around after this.
Yeah, I think it was. And it leads to one of the more entertaining kill scenes in this film.
Yeah.
And again, that sort of ties into the Henenlotter vibe, because I feel like this kill scene in particular was also very Henenlotter inspired. There's a lot of bits, particularly in the second act, that remind me of Bad Biology, which came about 10 years after this film. Mm-hmm. So I'm very curious to see whether Henenlotter may have seen this at some point. I mean, I know he gets a lot of screeners because he has a separate distribution operation that he runs. It wouldn't surprise me that he saw this at some point, because, he's into that kind of crowd and those kind of circles. It might have been he watched this and got a bit of an inspiration to pull that, because there were elements from this where I went, oh, that is literally a scene in Bad Biology. Why is that there?
Wow. Yeah, I haven't seen that, but I'll definitely have to check it out and see what it would be like if Colony Mutation were made by a competent filmmaker.
You know what? If it's not bad. I don't think it's Henenlotter's best work, but when he was making Bad Biology specifically, he was undergoing treatment for cancer, and it was quite bad. So he was basically going into chemotherapy. I think he said he was going into chemotherapy at 7:30 in the morning, and then he was on set all day from 8:30. So he'd come out of it and go straight into filming all day. It's a fun film. It's very dark, very bleak in places, but I feel like it has a lot of influence from a lot of crossed wires with this film, but it's a lot more polished and a lot better constructed, and they actually give it a much more coherent plot, which is nice.
I mean, if Frank Henenlotter's film is much more polished and coherent than yours, then that's truly saying something about your film.
This is the thing. It's wild. I mean, I'd definitely pair them up if you can find a copy. Severin did the 4K and Blu-ray remaster of it recently, but if you can find a copy of it, I'm sure there'll be some websites that'll have it. It's interesting, and I think it would pair up quite well with this as a double feature. Certainly. Yeah,
I think Colony Mutation is sort of the midnight movie. Once everyone's half asleep and has no idea what's going on, they can just kind of watch this in a haze after they were fully cognizant watching Bad Biology.
After the beers have gone.
Yeah. So while Jim is killing these two bums, Jenny's waiting for him at the restaurant, but he never shows up. Back at Jenny's apartment, Jim and Jenny get into an argument. They slap each other, and Jenny kicks Jim out. Jim goes back to the office and falls asleep. He has another dream about running through the woods. He wakes up and kills a security guard. And we cut to the next morning where, you guessed it, Jim calls Jenny on the phone. He's trying to patch things up with her, and she's a bit hesitant. And then, you guessed it again, Jenny gets another phone call. But this time it's from her sister Suzanne, who invites Jenny and Jim over to her house at an unspecified date in the near future. Jim goes to Kelly to try and find a cure to proteum batch number 607, but Kelly reiterates that there is no cure, so once again, Jim's leg detaches itself and kills Kelly.
One of my favourite lines of the film, probably the favourite line of the film for me, is just before that scene with the scientist. And I think it's Jim who says it. He turns to somebody and just says, "I got to go drain my weasel." Just perfect timing and very sincere delivery, but it just caught me at the right moment. I laughed for a good solid 10 seconds at that.
But Not sure if I caught that one, but I think I had fully checked out by this point.
Yeah. It's like I say, this is one of those films where there's long gulfs of dullness, and then there's just random moments that kind of snap you back in for a few seconds and then let you go again.
Definitely.
Like, if you sit here for 5 minutes and watch Jim go through the woods, you get to see a scientist get his leg ripped off. It's okay, fine. But yeah, up to this point, I'm just kind of, I'm in a similar boat to yourself. I'm kind of autopiloting a bit. It's just little moments that I keep picking up on here and there. But by this point, I'm now probably on IMDb looking up Frank Henenlotter's filmography to try and figure out where I'm remembering all of these different scenes and lines and vibes from. So yeah, that's pretty much where I am at this point with it.
Yep.
I thought that the scientist death scene was fun enough, especially for low budget.
I mean, it's really the only death scene with any sort of like lighting in it.
Yeah.
It's the only one you actually get to see.
It's a good sign when you're saying, I liked this part of the film. It had lighting. But yeah, I mean, the big question, that crossed my mind after this scientist died was, why are none of these bodies being reported? Like,
so this is the thing, is that he kills his wife. She's the first one that dies, but he never says anything to anyone because, coming up in a little bit, him and Jenny have another argument about why he hasn't left Meredith. So, it's not reported. No one at the Gendesk Corporation has been like, hey, this person hasn't shown up for work in however many days. It's just like, it's so weird.
Yeah. I mean, not to mention the dead security guard and the dead scientist now, and I'm pretty sure Jim isn't, assimilating the bodies, or at the very least he isn't cleaning up because he could barely eat a pack of raw bacon from a fridge when it was sealed, so I can't envision him with a mop and bucket trying to hide the evidence.
Right.
Yeah, at this point, the sort of logic issues started to crawl in a bit. It's one of the downsides when your film has long gulfs of nothing really happening. It makes you think, which is the worst thing you can do if you're one of these movies, because then you start picking at it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, like I said, they have another conversation about he needs to leave Meredith. Jenny decides to give Jim another chance when he offers to meet her sister for dinner the following evening. And now, listeners, you may have noticed that this film has fallen into a very predictable pattern at this point. So I'm going to give you 5 seconds of silence to guess what happens next. Yep, you guessed it. Jim picks up a woman and kills her. Only this time, his fingers, which look an awful lot like dicks, detach and murder Jim's prey.
Wonderful. Perfect artistry at its finest.
Yeah, we get a couple of minutes of nothing in particular. Jenny wistfully wanders around the city. Jim, I guess, monologues about his life to the corpse of Jenny because, oh yeah, Jenny gets killed off screen unceremoniously.
I missed that. I think I was still hooked up on the scene. I don't know whether it's coming up or whether it's the scene that was prior to that, where the scene with the raw beef.
It was, prior to that.
Yeah,
Maybe.
yeah.
I don't remember.
There's a scene where Jim goes to feed his parasitic penis raw beef, and it eats a bit of it, and then he does a sick, which, in fairness, I've done that on many a Saturday night, but that's by the by. And that's where he kind of realises that the parasite in him can't eat raw meat anymore. It has to eat fresh flesh that is, still got a pulse going through it. I completely missed Jenny being murdered because I was still focusing on I just watched a man feed his penis raw beef.
So...
Let alone that it's off screen. Bloody hell.
There's a scene where she is meeting 2 women that have not been in the movie before for lunch. And she's just like, I gotta go. And then it shows her looking out onto a river wistfully. And then a harsh cut to Jim monologuing about the sort of life he wanted to have. And his body parts are shown eating a body. You don't see her face, but she's not in the rest of the movie. So I have to assume that it's her. And maybe he says something about it during the grand finale. I really wasn't paying attention. So...
No, I didn't pick anything up either. If you hadn't have told me that she was dead, I wouldn't have known.
Yeah.
In fairness, I got really confused because the 2 women who are coming up shortly, who Jim goes to meet, I'm terrible with faces. I thought that one of them maybe was Jenny, but with a new hairstyle or something. So it took me a while to kind of figure, oh wait, no, these are 2 different characters.
Yeah.
But yeah, you mentioned it, her completely disappearing is that's interesting. I assume probably either the actress's check bounced or she just saw some of the rushes and went, nah, not doing this anymore. No, done.
Yeah. So at this point, we finally get to the dinner at Suzanne's house. Jim tells Suzanne that Jenny had to go to the store. He attacks Suzanne, she slaps him, and his head goes flying across the room. Jim's body removes its shirt, revealing some oversized nipples, a Videodrome stomach vagina, and all of Jim's limbs detach from his torso and attack Suzanne.
My literal guttural instinct, the second his shirt opened and I saw it, was, oh wow, it's my favourite Showa era kaiju. Because it's just... At this point, I think the film finally kind of leaves the road, so to speak.
Yep.
Because the thing is, they haven't got the budget or the skill to even really do a good final fight sequence. And because of the colour grading and how everything is very, very dark, you can't really see what's going on. You just keep getting sort of random flashes of things. Yeah, again, it kind of hit me strong with the Henenlotter vibes, but at this point, I'm done with the film, really. And even when it's going to its most surreal kind of moments of body horror, they don't really capitalise on it that much. And that's where a lot of the random updated computer-generated bits start creeping in as well.
Yeah.
Which only confuse things even further because they're not related to anything that's on screen. It's not like they've digitally inserted them into the video footage. They've literally just hard cut to some random CG stuff that's not even in the right aspect ratio, if memory serves. I think it cuts from widescreen to 4:3 for it. Yeah, it's a total mess of a finale. It's just footage being thrown at the screen. The script makes no sense. The dialogue is just, again, automatic writing. It's just them saying things. At one point, I think Jim mentions modular humanity.
Yep, it's the newest
whatever that
thing,
is.
modular humanity. There's a couple pieces of dialogue towards the end of this movie that they're like callbacks to things that never happened. That's one of them. And so this last part is about 8 minutes. The first time I watched it, it was basically watching 8 minutes of a black screen because of how poor the quality was. And then suddenly a CGI finger with wings goes across the screen. And it was one of the most confusing things. So I didn't even realize that during this, Jim's head sprouts little arms and legs and starts attacking Susan.
I didn't see that either from the Tubi version that I saw. Instead of a black screen, it was a blue screen.
Wow.
With exactly the same issues. I could only make out Jim's head at the very, very end, and I didn't spot his little arms or legs, but it looked very much like... I assume you'll know this. You've seen Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, haven't you?
Yes.
It reminded me very much of the first episode, Hell Hath Fury, where Garth's friend explodes and it's just like a head on the floor through like a cutout piece of cardboard.
Yeah.
It's just a very strange and incoherent finale that felt very out of tone with the entire rest of the film. And it really made me wish that they'd kind of done more Parasite things through the film rather than just making him have a bit of a parasitic penis for most of it and having him do a sick if he eats beef. It would have been nice to see it a bit more, because I mean that's why films like Cronenberg's version of The Fly or Videodrome work so well. They sort of slow bake in the body horror elements so that by the time you get to the finale and it's the big reveal and everything's a bit more like, oh whoa, what's going on here? You've kind of had that slow dribs and drabs of information being peppered in throughout, so you're kind of subconsciously prepared for it to go down.
Yeah.
This doesn't do that. This just kind of half-arses it, and then at the end throws everything at the screen at once and expects you to kind of take it all in, and there's nothing to take in because, like you say, a lot of it's referencing stuff that isn't even in the film.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a little bit of it throughout the movie of like just sort of Reanimator vibes. This was when I definitely got it, and maybe it's just like, you know, a decapitated head talking to a woman. Maybe that's what was having me draw the parallels to Reanimator, but it definitely shifts towards that sort of tone, like you were saying, in these last 8 minutes, even though it really hasn't been like that up to this point.
No, absolutely. In fairness, and I'll say this hand on heart, I didn't clock the Reanimator comparison, but now that you mention it, yeah, that is pretty one for one, really, in some regards. Yeah. Now that you mention it, yeah. It's, I don't know, it feels frustrating. It feels like the filmmaker didn't really know what to do with the finale.
Or any part of the movie, for that matter.
Well, this is it. I mean, like, it for all of its flaws, the film throughout at least has some kind of narrative elements in place. There's some, even if it's all done over the phone, at least they kind of bother to put like a little bit of a plotting in. I mean, to be honest, I was thinking when I first started watching this that the affair angle was going to be the majority of the film, and that maybe, you know, Meredith's death would be in the final act, and that the film would be focused more around the tensions of the affair, and that the parasite side of things would have been more of a metaphor for the guilt that was building up in Jim about the affair.
Boy, were you wrong.
And yeah, I was very wrong. They airlock that thing straight away. and then the parasite has no meaning other than it's a parasite. So yeah, I don't know. As far as endings go, I just kind of shrugged as the credits hit and went, well, it's an ending, I guess.
Well, before we get to the credits, there is one more thing we have to talk about, because at the end of this battle, Suzanne picks up Jim's head and repeatedly bashes it against the linoleum until he's finally dead. But just when Suzanne's troubles seem to be over, there's a phone call. Yes, there could not be a more appropriate ending to this film than yet another phone call. The voice on the other line says,
"Hello, I represent the Jaco Extermination Company. Do you currently have a problem with household pests?"
Not anymore.
Boom. Credits.
Boom.
Colony Mutation.
And if ever a film needed the Inception drone harder over those credits, just, yeah, wow. What an ending. What an ending to something that could at best be described as a film.
So what are your thoughts on Colony Mutation, Dan? I know it's a loaded question.
It is. It is. To keep it as simple as possible, I don't hate it. It has enough moments in it that made me enjoy it enough that I wasn't calling for the director's blood by the time of the credits. I think this would have worked much better as a short. A 30 to 40 minute probably would have been more than enough for this. It really screams to me a filmmaker who was maybe a little out of his depth at the time they were making this film, but wanted to get it in front of audiences. And studios buy features, they don't buy shorts. So I think he just took an idea that maybe he'd pitched as a short and just padded it out until it hit the minimum possible runtime to get it into cinemas, and then got it out there. I don't love it. I think that it's technically absurd in every sense. When I say that Things is more technically proficient than this, I mean it. And the enhanced version doesn't help it in any way, really, apart from it makes some of the scenes a little bit more visible, which isn't necessarily a good thing. I mean, I gave it, when I put it on Letterboxd, I gave it a 1.5, and I know you gave it a half. The reason I gave it the 1.5 is because the handful of moments where I enjoyed it, I thought it was actually quite funny. But it's one of those where I feel like it would work more as a supplementary film than something that I would actively choose to watch. I don't think I would sit down one evening and go, I'm going to watch Colony Mutation. I think it would be, as you fantastically put it, one of those where I'm 6 movies deep. I've had probably about 4 or 5 beers. You know, the room feels smoky and hazy, and I go, you know what? I'm going to put Colony Mutation on and just absorb the ambience of this strangely made production.
It's interesting that you bring up the point of this would have worked better as a short, or, you know, studios buy features, not shorts, because two of the films I've talked about on this show, Gakidama and Biotherapy, are 2 V cinema films. And so basically a lot of the early V cinema films in Japan, straight to video, there was a lot of experimentation with the length because they wanted to create movies that people wouldn't fast forward through. So kind of the idea in the early days was all killer, no filler. And what those movies do turn out to be a lot of the times are just very low budget practical effects showcases that range from like 25 minutes to an hour. And so I feel like, you know, this actually follows a lot of the same plot beats as those type of movies, and it would be so much more enjoyable if they had filmed it with the intention of it being, you know, less than an hour in length, 45 minutes, 30 minutes, so that they could have saved some of their money from, you know, pointless scenes of people talking on the phone and walking through hallways. Use that, up the practical effects, get some lights in there so you can see everything. It could have been enjoyable at that length.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that it's got good bones. It's got a good framework. It's those bloody phone calls. It's the restaurants. There's so much stuff which you could have shown in 10 seconds that is stretched out to a 3-minute phone conversation. I get the feeling that the cast were a little bit flippant. I mean, obviously, one of our main characters disappears before she even gets a kill scene. But yeah, it sounds like from what you've just described there that it probably would have really worked quite well as a half an hour thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, I didn't hate it. It's one of those where I think I'd have to be in a very particular mindset and probably at least a few beers deep before I would actively put this one on again. And I think it would work best if you had friends who also appreciated those kind of films with you, because then you can kind of, have a little bit of a laugh and a little bit of a riff with them. But yeah, it's interesting.
I think, at the top I mentioned that this is, I think, the only half-star film for me on Letterboxd that I don't actively hate, because usually for me, that's what it's reserved for. Like, a half-star film to me is not only just technically terrible, but it also makes me angry watching it. And so I can see why I would have thought that the first time, because you can't see half of the movie. Watching the new transfer on Tubi, I'm like you, like I don't hate this movie. I mean, and I think that the new transfer allowed me to get some sort of enjoyment out of it. Would I bump it up to 1 star? Probably not, because I still think it's pretty bad, but maybe 3/4 of a star. It's almost there, because it's bad, but it's not offensively bad.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. It's awkward in the sense of it's so close to, if it'd just pick a lane, if it'd just get that tone nailed down, get the edit just that bit more tighter, it'd be there, but it just isn't. And it's frustrating in that sense, really.
Yeah. I feel like or at least I have probably said everything I need to say about Colony Mutation throughout this discussion. If you like phone calls, this is the movie for you. But did you have anything, just final couple words or anything like that? Any thoughts or notes that you didn't get the chance to get out?
The only other note that I don't think I got around to, and it was just the first thing I noticed, was I sat and actually read the credits, which you should never do with a film like this. But the film seemingly had some kind of crowdfunding to restore it for the Tubi version, the Visual Vengeance version. And the first person they special thanks from the crowdfunding is somebody going by the name Ratso, which I thought was wonderfully apt, given that the film opens with a rat being literally dissected for 2 minutes.
Yep.
The note that I put is, they thank Ratso first in the special thanks, and I think that says a lot. But yeah, no, that's pretty much everything I can think of. Colony Mutation. It's kind of, sort of, eh.
So yeah, that was Colony Mutation. Dan, thank you again for coming on and breathing life into this dead format with me. I'd love to have you back sometime if you're not too traumatized from this film.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on it. Like I say, it's been genuinely lovely to catch back up with you. So yeah, if you ever want me back, I'm more than ready and willing.
Oh, I've already got some ideas, but before I let you go, why don't you just once more give a plug for TYTD Reviews and tell us about anything interesting you've got in the works?
Yes, certainly. So you can find me on YouTube and Letterboxd under TYTD Reviews. Currently, I am in the process of working on a new season, which should be going live sometime in the spring. Exact times to be confirmed. In between that as well, I'm currently working on a audio-only release of adult film reviews called the After Dark Collection. We're doing a second volume of that, which should be out in early spring. But yeah, at the minute, there's 470 reviews on my channel currently, and we cover all genres, all strange oddities and everything in between, so head on over there and say hi, and we'll say hi back.
Awesome. So yeah, on behalf of Dan, I'm Chris, and this has been another episode of Dead Formats. If you have any questions about the show, or if you have a dead format topic that you'd like to hear me cover, or if you have any suggestions for potential guests, please reach out. You can email me at deadformatspod@gmail.com, or you can reach out to me on Instagram at deadformatspod. Thanks for listening.